Well, hi. Welcome back. With some ice cream. I'm hoping this will whet your appetite for a good book. I like citrus sweets. I think they're really good. Like lemony. Or like, my favorite thing for Christmas, which Santa always brings me in my stocking, is Terry's Chocolate Orange, which I think they're technically from the UK or Europe, but every now and then you can find them in like Publix. That's my particular favorite. But Santa was a slacker last year. Didn't get me one. What the heck? So, I'm gonna take these 2 bites of ice cream, and then we'll get started. Oh, cool. I think England has their, they're just on their game when it comes to chocolate, you know? Alright. So, I'm gonna cut this music off, let you guys like it in the background, or if it's not really loud enough to make a difference, just let me know. Oh no, Samai! Why is your phone broken? Okay. So, we're embarking on the wonderful journey of the second book in the Enola Holmes mystery. This is called The Case of the Left-Handed Lady, as designated in the little picture over there. So, where we last left off in the last book, Enola skipped out on her brothers and is embarking on the wonderful world, London, all on her own. So, we're going to pick this up. Get going. So, this No, I'm not. I'm just gonna get started. I was gonna read you the little inside chapter thing, but no, we're just gonna get going. This book has been brought to you by the Fitchburg Public Library from Wisconsin. So, thank you, Fitchburg Public Library, for withdrawing this book from your collection so that I could buy it on eBay. All of the books that I have purchased for this stream came from libraries, so I think they should get a special recognition. All of these books I first read from a library. They were library copies because I was not able to afford my own books. So, thank you, Fitchburg. You guys rule. Alright. Oh, and thanks for hosting, Semi. Appreciate it. Sorry, my nose is running. I'm really sorry, guys. I always feel like that's so rude when you're, like, wiping your nose in public, but... Whew! Man. So... Everything good? You guys good? I'm good. We're good. Alright. Take a drink of water. We're gonna get started. I'm not sure how long I'll be going. I guess I'm just gonna go till I'm tired of reading. So, go from there. London, January, 1889. We would not be in this deplorable situation, declares the younger and taller of the two men in the small club room, if you had not tried to bully her into boarding school. Sharp-featured and thin to the point of gauntness, pacing the floor in his shining black boots, black trousers, and black cutaway evening jacket with tails, he resembles a black egret. My dear brother, comfortably seated in a deep armchair upholstered in Morocco leather, the older, stouter man raises his eyebrows like winter hedgerows. Such bitterness of spirit is not at all in your usual character. He speaks placidly, for this is his club, specifically, its very secure private chamber for conversation. And he looks forward to an excellent roast beef dinner as he tells his younger sibling in kindly tones. While it is undeniable that the foolish girl is on her own in this great cauldron of a city, and might already have been robbed and left destitute, or worse, plundered of her virtue, still you must not allow yourself to become emotionally entangled in the problem. How not? The stalking man swivels to give him a hawk-like glare. She is our sister! And the other missing female is our mother. What of it? Will fretting like a foxhound in a kennel help to find her? If you must blame someone, adds the seated man, folding his hands across the pillowy expanse of his silken waistcoat, mother is the person at whom you should direct your ire. Logician that he is, he recites reasons. It is our mother who let the girl run wild in knickerbockers on a bicycle, rather than providing her with instruction in the drawing-room graces. It is our mother who spent her days painting posies while our sister climbed trees, and it is our mother who embezzles the funds that should have gone for the governess, dancing-master, decorous feminine dresses, etc. for the youngster, and it is our mother who ultimately abandoned the girl. On the child's 14th birthday, mutters the pacing man. Birthday or any other day, what does it matter? Complains the older brother, who is beginning to tire of the subject. Mother's the one who abdicated her responsibility, finally to the point of desertion, and then you impose your will on a broken-hearted young girl, ordering her to leave the only world she has ever known, now trembling beneath her feet. The only rational way to reform her into some semblance of decent young womanhood, interrupts the older brother with asperity. You of all people should see the logic. Logic is not everything. Certainly this is the first time I have ever heard you say so. No longer placid or comfortable, the stout man sits forward in his armchair, his boots sheathed by impeccable spats, painted on the parquet floor. Sorry, guys. He demands, why are you so overridden by emotion, so affected? Why is locating our rebellious runaway sister different than any other little problem? Because she is our sister! So much younger than you that you have met her exactly twice in your life! The tall, hawk-faced, restless one actually stands still. Once would have been enough. His quick, sharp voice has slowed and softened, but he does not look at his brother. Rather, he appears to stare through the oak-paneled walls of the clubroom to some distant place or time. He says, she reminds me of myself when I was that age. All nose and chin, gawky, awkward, simply not fitting in with any... Nonsense! At once the older brother puts stop to such balderdash. Preposterous! She is a female! Her intellect is inferior! She requires protection! There can be no comparison! Frowning, nevertheless like a statesman, he calms his tone in order to take charge. Such questioning of past events serves no useful purpose. The only rational query now is how do you propose to find her? By an apparent effort of the will, the tall man reins in his faraway gaze, focusing his keen grey eyes upon his brother. After a pause, he says merely, "I have a plan." "I expect nothing less. Might you share your plan with me?" Silence. Settling back into his armchair, the older brother smiles a thin smile. You needs must have your cloak of mystery, eh, Sherlock?" The younger brother, also known as the great detective, shrugs his shoulders. His manner now as cold as that of the elder. "There is no useful purpose to be served by telling you anything at this time, my dear Mycroft. If I am in need of your assistance, rest assured I shall call upon you." "For what purpose have you come here tonight, then?" "For once, to speak my mind." "Is it indeed your mind speaking, my dear Sherlock? It seems to me that your mental processes lack discipline. You have allowed your nerves to get the better of you. You seem overwrought." "A condition preferable, I think, to being not wrought at all." With an air of finality, Sherlock Holmes collects his hat, gloves, and walking sticks and turns toward the door. "Good night, Mycroft." "My best wishes for the success of your scheme, my dear Sherlock. Good night." Chapter the First. With a shock of astonishment, I read the card brought in to me on a silver tray by the page boy. Dr. John Watson, M.D. I spoke the name aloud to assure myself I was seeing it rightly, for I could not believe that this, of all persons, should be the first client to enter the newly opened, January 1889, office of London's, and indeed the world's only, scientific Purgatorian. Dr. John Watson? John was a common enough name, but Watson? And a medical doctor? It had to be, but still I did not wish to believe it. "Is it who I think it is, Jotty?" "How would I know, m'lady?" "Jotty, I have told you before you are to address me as Miss Michelle. Miss Michelle." I rolled my eyes, but what could one expect of a boy whose mother had named him Jodhpur, misspelled Jodhpur in the parish registry, because riding breeches sounded genteel to her? It was Jotty's awe of my ruffles and puff sleeves that made him call me lady, but he mustn't, or people would start asking questions. I wanted the page boy to retain his awe, which kept him from realizing I was actually a mere girl not much older than he, but I wanted him to cease and desist the m'lady. More calmly, remembering to guard against aristocratic edge upon my... More calmly, remembering to guard against any aristocratic edge upon my accent, I asked him, "You have already told the gentleman that Dr. Ragaston is not in?" "Yes, m'lady. Yes, Miss Michelle." The scientific Purgatorian's office bore the name of one Dr. Leslie T. Ragaston, because a scientist must needs be a man, but Dr. Ragaston would never be in, because he, the Ph.D. kind of doctor, did not exist except in my mind and upon the placards and business cards. I placed in shops, kiosks, fruit stalls, and lecture halls, wherever I could. "If you will invite Dr. Watson into my office, then I will see whether I can be of any help." Jotty ran out, his appearance, if not his intellect, smart. All boy in buttons, with braid on his cuffs and down the sides of his trousers, white gloves, striped hat looking rather like a miniature layer cake atop his head. But why not? Most uniforms are absurd. The moment his back disappeared, I sank into the wooden chair behind my desk, my knees trembling so badly that my silk petticoats rustled. This wouldn't do. Taking a deep breath, I shut my eyes a moment and called to mind my mother's face. Along with that image, I could almost hear her voice. "Enola, you will manage very well on your own." This mental exercise had the desired effect. Calmed, I opened my eyes in time to see Jotty showing Dr. Watson in from the parlor that served as a waiting room. "Dr. Watson, I am Dr. Ragaston's secretary, Miss Ivy Michelle." Rising and extending my hand to the visitor, I saw exactly what I would expect to see from his writings. A sturdy English gentleman, not well-to-do, but definitely of the educated class, with a ruddy face, kind eyes, and a slight inclination towards stoutness. And I hoped he saw me as I was pretending to be, an utterly conventional young working woman with a bulbous brooch centered upon her dress front, wearing equally hideous earrings, in general much bedecked in finery of inexpensive materials mimicking the very latest, just as absurd as a uniform, fashion. A girl, some of whose fair curls were not her own, but had formerly belonged most likely to a Bavarian peasant. Well, while respectable, a young female who was not well bred, one whose father might have been a saddle-maker or a tavern-keeper, a girl most likely preoccupied with the pursuit of a husband. If by means of the aforementioned brooch, plus a dog-collar necklace, too many ribbons, and the too obvious hair additions, I had created this impression, then my disguise was successful. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Michelle. Dr. Watson had already removed his hat, of course, but quite properly had waited to shake my hand before removing his gloves, and entrusting them, along with his walking stick, to the boy. Please sit down. I indicated an armchair. Do draw close to the hearth. Dreadfully cold out, is it not? Appalling. Never before have I seen the Thames frozen thick enough to skate across. As he spoke, he rubbed his hands together and extended them to the fire. Despite its best efforts, the room was none too warm, and I envied the visitor his cozy upholstered chair. Somehow, cold and damp had not troubled me so much before I had come to London, where already I had seen a beggar or the bodily remains of that person frozen to the pavement. Reseating myself on the comfortless wooden chair behind my desk, I hunched my shawl closer around my shoulders, rubbed my own hands, stiff despite the knitted mittens out of which my fingers poked, then picked up a pencil and notepad. I am so sorry, Dr. Watson, that Dr. Ragaston has gone out. I am sure he would be delighted to meet you. You are the same Dr. Watson who is an associate of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, are you not? I am. Polite, indeed humble, he turned to face me as he spoke, and it is on Mr. Holmes' behalf that I am here. My heart began pounding so hard I almost feared my visitor would hear it. No longer could I tell myself some lucky or unlucky accident had brought this particular man here. Here to consult the world's only professional finder of things and persons lost. But I tried to sound merely polite with the right middle-class accent, the right clerical blend of efficiency and servility. Indeed? Posed as if to take notes, I asked, what is the nature of Mr. Holmes's difficulty? I am sure you will understand, Miss Michelle, that I would prefer to wait and speak privately to Dr. Ragaston. I smiled. And I am sure you will understand, Dr. Watson, that I am entrusted to take down the preliminaries so as to conserve Dr. Ragaston's valuable time. I am Dr. Leslie Ragaston's authorized agent, not to take action, of course. I amended in order to soothe his natural distrust of any female. But I often serve as his eyes and ears, just as you do for Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I added, coaxing, but trying not to sound as if I were. Trying not to show how inwardly I begged, please, please, I must know whether I have guessed rightly what brings you here. Yes, said Dr. Watson uncertainly. Quite. He really did have gentle eyes, all the more so when he was worried. But I am not sure. The matter is delicate, you see. Holmes does not know about this visit. But my brother has not sent him? My heart settled down somewhat, yet began to ache. Rather dully, I told Dr. Watson, you can rely on my complete discretion. Quite, of course, as if somehow my diminishing interest cajoled him, a troubled soul, into his unburdening himself to me. He grasped the arms of his chair and began his narration. Doubtless you know that I boarded for several years with Mr. Sherlock Holmes at the beginning of his astounding career. But as I am now married, and in general practice as a medical doctor, I see far less of him than I did formerly. It has not escaped my notice, however, that since this past summer he has seemed uneasy in his mind, and over the past few months positively distraught, to the extent that he is not eating properly nor sleeping. And I have become concerned for him, not only as a friend, but as a physician. He has lost weight, his color is unhealthy, he has grown quite melancholy and irritable. Busily noting down all of this for Dr. Ragaston, I was able to keep my head lowered over my desk so that Dr. Watson could not see my face. A good thing, for I am sure dismay showed. Tears formed in my eyes. My brother, paragon of the coldly logical mind, distraught? Unable to eat or sleep? I had no idea that he was capable of such depth of feeling, least of all about me. Dr. Watson went on. Although I have asked him repeatedly what is troubling him so, he denies being in any difficulty, and when yesterday I persisted in questioning him, he flew into such a temper, so out of keeping with his usual steely self-control, indeed so irrational that I felt I must act upon my concerns whether he liked it or not, for his own sake. Therefore I sought out his brother, Mr. Mycroft Holmes. Ivy Michelle, I realized, should know nothing of Sherlock Holmes's brother, therefore I interrupted. How does one spell his name, please? It is an odd name, is it not? Watson spelled it for me, gave me Mycroft's address in London, and then continued. After some hesitation, Mycroft Holmes explained to me that he and Sherlock Holmes have the singular misfortune of being unable to locate their mother, and not only their mother gone without a trace, but also their younger sister. 2 family members, their only remaining family, actually have vanished. How dreadful, I murmured, keeping my eyes down. I no longer felt inclined to weep, instead I wanted to smile. Indeed, I wanted to thumb my nose at my ever-so-eldest brother Mycroft, who had wanted to make a mimicking young lady out of me, and I found it difficult to maintain a suitably concerned expression as I played the part of one who knew nothing of the matter. Kidnapped? Dr. Watson shook his head. There have been no ransom demands. No, they are runaways. How shocking. I remembered to remain ignorant. They have gone off together? No, no, separately. The mother went missing last summer, and the girl ran away 6 weeks later as she was being sent to boarding school. She went alone. I believe that is why Holmes has taken the matter so much to heart. If the girl were with her mother, you see, he might not approve, but he would know his sister was safe. However, it seems that the girl, who is still quite a child, has travelled all by herself to London. A child, you say? A mere 14 years of age. Mycroft Holmes told me that he and his brother have reason to believe the girl has access to considerable funds. I stiffened, feeling a stab of anxiety, for how on earth could they guess that? And they fear she is disguising herself as a young gentleman of leisure. I relaxed, for nothing could be less true. I hoped never to descend to the theatrical cliché of disguising myself as a male, though certainly I did not admit myself to being Ivy Michelle. I did not limit myself to being Ivy Michelle. And as such, she might be exposed to decadent influences, Dr. Watson was saying, and may be trapped into a life of ill repute. Ill repute? I hadn't the vaguest notion what he was talking about, but dutifully noted it down. Mr. Mycroft Holmes and Mr. Sherlock Holmes have some reason for thinking this? I inquired. Yes, the mother was, or is, a most determined suffragist, and the girl herself is of a regrettably unfeminine mold, it would seem. Indeed, how sad. Glancing up at him from under a poof of false bangs, I fluttered my false eyelashes and smiled with subtly tinted lips. Indeed, I used a hint of disreputable substance called rouge all over my face to change the sallow, aristocratic tone of my skin to a hardier, more ordinary pink. Could you provide Dr. Ragiston with a photograph of the girl? No, nor of the woman either. It would seem that both avoided photographers. Whatever for? He sighed, his facial expression becoming for the first time somewhat less than kind. Part of their determination to act contrary to the laws of feminine nature, I supposed. Could you give me their names, please, and describe them? He spelt the names for me. Lady Eudora Verney Holmes, Miss Enola Holmes. Mum had showed prescience when she named me Enola, which backwards spells alone. Dr. Watson said, From what I've been told, the girl is the more remarkable of the two, quite tall and thin. I had been trying to gain weight, but so far unsuccessfully due to the fish head soups and sheep's head stews served by my thrifty landlady. With a long face and pronounced, that is to say, a rather Ciceronian nose and chin. What a tactful way to say that I looked entirely too much like my brother Sherlock. Having failed yet to make myself plump, I kept inside my mouth, one in each cheek, a pair of rubber devices that were actually intended for filling out another unmentionable part of the personage. They, along with nostril inserts, quite altered the shape of my face. And an angular personage rather lacking in feminine charm, continued Dr. Watson. She has shown a preference for masculine clothing and tomboyish activities, walks with a long masculine stride, and although may be entirely lost to decent society if she is not soon found. And altogether may be entirely lost to decent society if she is not soon found. And the mother? I asked in order to change the subject before I burst out laughing. 64 years of age, but appears considerably younger, physically unremarkable, but in temperament strong-minded and willful. A talented artist who has unfortunately turned her energies to the cause of women's so-called rights. Oh? She wishes to wear trousers? He smiled at my apparent scorn for such reformers. Quite likely. She favors so-called rational dress. Are there any indications at all as to where she might be found? None, but the girl, as I have said, is thought to be in London. I put down my pencil to face him. Very well, Dr. Watson, I will inform Dr. Ragiston of the particulars, but I must warn you that he is unlikely to take the case. My very first case, an impossible predicament. To find myself, I could not possibly touch it. Why ever not? I had already worked out the answer. Because he does not care to deal with intermediaries. He will ask why Mr. Sherlock Holmes has not come here himself. Dr. Watson interrupted with some heat, although his strong feeling was not directed at me. Because Holmes is too reserved, too proud. If he would not even tell me the reason for his distress, do you think he would divulge it to a stranger? But a fellow investigator, I remarked mildly. Even worse, he would consider himself humiliated in the presence of... Rather abruptly, Dr. Watson broke off, then asked, For the matter of that, one must wonder who is Dr. Ragiston, begging your pardon, Michelle. Take the name Holmes, reverse its syllables, mess, hole, then spell it the way it's pronounced, Michelle. Absurdly simple. Yet he would never guess. No one would. Miss Michelle, I mean no offense, but I have made inquiries, and nobody has heard of Dr. Ragiston. I came here only because he claims to specialize in finding persons who are lost. Anything that is lost, I interjected. But I have found no one who can vouch for him. Because he is making his start, just as your friend once had to do. Dr. Ragaston has yet to earn a name for himself, but you will be interested to know that he is a keen student of the methods of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Indeed? Dr. Watson appeared mollified. Yes, he idolizes Mr. Holmes, and will be most surprised to hear that his hero has been unable himself to locate his missing mother and sister. Sitting forward as if his armchair had suddenly become uncomfortable, Dr. Watson cleared his throat. I suppose, he said slowly, it might be because Holmes lacks interest in such cases normally. He finds them commonplace and featureless, and generally will not look into them. Why, just yesterday, Watson added, as I was going in to see Holmes, out came Sir Eustace Alastair and Lady Alastair, who had been there to beg him to inquire the whereabouts of their daughter, and he had sent them away with a flea in their ear. I ignored the logical impossibility of one flea in one ear for two people, because my attention was all taken up by the substance. Sir Eustace Alastair? His daughter is missing? But I have seen nothing in the newspapers. Watson put his fist to his mouth and coughed. It has been hushed up to prevent scandal. They fear the girl has gone off with the seducer, then. I must investigate this matter. I knew that Dr. Watson would tell me no more. Already he considered that he had said too much, but it brought me my first case after all. I would find the missing daughter of the baronet. Looking none too happy, Watson stood up. The interview was at an end. Reaching for the bell-pull, I rang for Jotty to come see him out. I wish to meet Dr. Ragaston personally, Watson told me, before he takes any action. Of course. Your street address? Dr. Ragaston will be in touch as soon as he has reviewed my notes, I lied. After I copied the address, I stood to see my visitor out the door. After he had left, I seated myself in the armchair he had vacated by the fire, and rather paradoxically began shivering. It's the end of chapter 1. Catch up. Catch up, catch up. Oh, look, it's a clip! That's my first clip! Crap, I don't remember where I left off. Oh, Rita's talking about her Jaffa cakes. That's where I left off. We just want Enola's mom back! I know, everybody does. I know. I know. Oh no, out of pizza! Oh, Semi! Semi, so sad. I'm glad you get a new one, that's good. Edible gold flakes. Peeling pears. Are you gonna make pear preserves? I want some pear preserves. Alright. Let's see how many chapters are in this book. I think it's the same as last one. I think it's like 15 chapters. Let's see. 17 chapters and an epilogue. So I could do it in 3 parts if I read 6 chapters, but I don't think I'm going to make it through 6 chapters. I've been going 30 minutes. We'll see. A cobbler thing sounds good. I'm going to go put my bowl back in the kitchen. I'll be right back, guys. Okay, I'm back. Just plug this in. Alrighty. Yep, just stare at my room. Thanks. Alrighty. You guys ready for chapter 2? Maybe I could read through 5. 1 through 5. We'll see. That'll be the goal. We'll see. But we better get trucking if we're gonna hit that many chapters. Alright, chapter the 2nd. I shivered with fear of my brother, Sherlock, whom I adored. He was my hero. He was my nemesis. I very nearly worshipped him, but if he tracked me down I would lose my freedom forever. Yet he was distraught on my account? I could no longer tell myself that I had hurt nothing except his pride. But what to do? If I gave Sherlock Holmes the slightest hint of my well-being, he would somehow use it to entrap me. There was Mum to consider, too. How much time did she have left to enjoy freedom and happiness away from the constraints of propriety and a woman's place before she departed this life? Were men the only ones allowed to have any pride? My other brother, Mycroft, entered my thoughts only briefly. I did not care whether his pride were hurt. Although quite as intelligent as Sherlock, otherwise he rather resembled last night's leftover cooked potato, cold and inert. He did not care for me enough to try and find me. But there was another consideration. Why should Mycroft have troubled himself to tell Watson about me? What if it were all a lie? What if Dr. Watson's visit was a ruse and Sherlock had himself sent his friend to spy upon me? Nonsense, my brother couldn't know. But somehow he did know what he should not remotely know, that I had money. And he had perhaps noticed that Dr. Ragiston had taken the offices of the so-called astral Praetorian, whom I, Enola Holmes, had helped to send to prison. What if Sherlock Holmes sensed a connection? Unlikely, I decided after weighing this thought in my mind. More likely, if Sherlock Holmes himself had sent Dr. Watson to spy, it was out of curiosity, to assess whether the scientific Praetorian might afford him competition as a detective. In which case might it be untrue that my brother was suffering? But I could have sworn it was genuine concern I had seen in Dr. Watson's eyes. Confound it, how was I supposed to know what to do about family? Spiritualist levitation seemed less mysterious to me. I wish I could consult with Mum. However, I had not seen her since that fateful day last July when she had taken her unexpected departure. Indeed, I did not know exactly where she was. I had been in touch with her only through the personal advertising columns of the Pall Mall Gazette, her favorite newspaper, cultured yet more progressive than the Times, Modern Womanhood, the Journal of Personal Rights, and a few other publications using either ciphers or codes. For instance, when I had hypothesized she was wandering with the gypsies, I had placed the following: My chrysanthemum, the fourth letter of true love, the fourth letter of purity, the first letter of thoughts, the fourth letter of innocence, the first letter of fidelity, the third or fourth letter of departure, and the first letter of the same. Correct? Ivy. The chrysanthemum had been our code word for Mum, and the message itself referred simply to the certain other blossoms as put forth in the meanings of flowers, a reference book Mum had given me. Such symbolism was common knowledge amongst people who exchanged floral greetings. In my personal advertisement, then, a reverse bouquet, so to speak, true love stood for the forget-me-not, purity stood for the lily, and so on to include pansy, daisy, ivy, sweet pea, and sweet pea again. The fourth letter of forget-me-not was G, the fourth letter of lily was Y, etc., to spell out gypsies. Within a week, Mum had replied by a similar code of flowers. Yes, where are you? I had answered in likewise, London. Such had been the extent of our communication. I very much wanted to see my Mum, yet hesitated due to the strength of my feelings towards her, not all of them kind. Not all of them sure, either. Therefore, I would rather have located her on my own good time and on my own terms. But now such upsetting news of Sherlock, it was necessary, I decided, to put my own reservations aside. I wanted to consult with Mum. I needed to consult with Mum, but I must contact her most cautiously. I waited until I got home away from Jotty and the other servants. While I could have lodged in the comfortable upper floors of the Gothic edifice that housed Dr. Ragiston's office, for caution's sake I did not. Instead, Dr. Ragiston rented those rooms to a variety of rather bohemian lodgers, thus stabilizing my finances, while I had found a quite humble room in the East End, where my brother was not likely to look for me. He would not think his sister would either venture to such slums. In my run-down place of residence, a decrepit house cramped between smut-colored tenements, I was the only lodger. The landlady, a sweet elderly woman named Mrs. Tupper, was blessedly deaf, requiring one to shout into a speaking trumpet she held to her ear. Therefore she could ask me few questions. The only servant was a daily girl of all work whom I never saw. In every regard, the situation was ideal for concealment. Therefore, I waited until evening, when, safe in my modest bedchamber, comfortably divested of corset, bust enhancer, and the frills, false hair, and facial inserts of Ivy Michelle, I relaxed near the fire in a dressing gown, with my feet up on a hassock to escape the cold draughts along the floor. Pulling a candle closer to my side, I began to compose a cipher to Mum. Dogwood 4, iris twice, 3 violet, and apple blossom. How many? This message must be, I had decided, different than my previous ones and much more difficult. How did Brother Sherlock know I had money? This worried me greatly, as he knew that much had he somehow deciphered and attributed to Mum and me earlier communications in the agony columns of the Pall Mall Gazette. I took what I had written so far and broke it into groups of 3 letters. Here, I'll show you, because I like showing you guys this. So, sorry, I'm really bad at this camera. So this is what she wrote originally, and then she broke it into groups of 3 letters. If you can see that. I'm sorry, it's really dim. There we go. Just give it long enough for you to see it. I hadn't mentioned Ivy for caution's sake, but hoped that Mum would nevertheless recognize the cipher as being from me by its coat of flowers. Iris symbolized a message. But also, fervidly I hoped Mum would grasp how the code had changed this time. An iris was unique for having 3 petals on top and 3 on the bottom. A dogwood bloom just as unique for having 4 petals, and a violet and an apple blossom both had 5. I had mentioned the violet because it stood for faithfulness, and the apple blossom because sometimes when I was a little girl, Mum would cut an apple crosswise to show me the 5-pointed star inside and explain how the apple and its seeds grew from the 5-petaled flower. Having broken up the message, I reversed it. Scowling, I eyed the question mark. It would make the cipher too easy to solve. I replaced it with what Mum would call a null. So here's what she changed it to. So, just broke it up, and then took the question mark out. Replaced it with a null, which is the little X. There. I imagined Mum would solve this easily, as it was not unlike the first cipher with which she had perplexed me, but this was a mere preliminary to make Mum think about the number 5. I had hoped she would then understand that one can take the alphabet and divide it into 5 parts. And each part has 5 letters except the last, but Z is used so seldom that it can be lumped together with Y. I then wrote my real message to Mum. London Bridge falling down, urgent, must talk, and enciphered it thus. L is in the 3rd group or line of letters, and it is the 2nd letter there, 32. O is in the 3rd line, 5th letter, 35, and so on. Does that make sense to you guys? You can see it again. So, L is in the 3rd, and the 2nd letter, so 32. And then this is what it looks like when it's done, when she writes it all out. I considered running all the numbers together and letting Mum separate the words afterwards, but decided against it. She would have enough difficulty with the cipher, 3rd letter 2nd line, or 3rd line 2nd letter, and decoding the London Bridge reference meant to tell her where the trouble was and where I wanted to talk with her. My final draft read. Ooh, this mirrored thing, right here, my final draft read. This I copied several times for several different periodicals, triple-checking each copy for accuracy, before folding both ends toward the center, and afterward fixing the overlapping edge with wax. Ordinary white candle wax, as I had no colorful sealing wax. After addressing the blank sides of the papers, I set them aside. Tomorrow I would take them to Fleet Street. Then, until Mum answered, there would be nothing to do but wait. I detested waiting. In regard to the daughter of Sir Eustace Alastair, again I must wait. I could not pursue that matter until tomorrow. But I had to do something before I would be able to sleep. So, getting up from my cozy seat by the fire, I began to dress. Again, but differently this time. Instead of ladylike underpinnings, I put on flannel unmentionables that warmed me from wrists to ankles, then an old corset that had once kept a knife thrust from penetrating my person. I laced it only just tightly enough to keep it on, as I wore it not for vanity but for defense. and also for armament. Where a steel busk had once made the corset's front as rigid as a poker, I had substituted a slender 5-inch dagger sheathed in the garment's heavily starched linen. This weapon, double-edged, razor-sharp, I could reach through a placket in the bosom of the garment I now put on. A very simple black dress I had sewed for myself in hopes that it would pass as the habit of a nun. I fastened my high collar, ribbed with whalebone, to foil cutthroats. Over thick socks I put on my old black boots. Finally, I arranged a black cowl and veil to cover my head and face. Such was the apparel of my nighttime life. That's the end of chapter 2. Oh, yeah, that would be pretty cool. I leave the room and Tor's like, yeah. Be pretty great. Yep, acting out the story through interpretive dance. There you go. Alrighty. Yeah, you guys are Splatoon colors. So cute. It's like you were meant to be little inklings together. Alrighty. So I hope you guys are enjoying these books, because I enjoyed them. It's nice rereading through them. I keep tasting my mint chip ice cream I ate earlier. I'm gonna go get some more water, because my bottle's empty. And I'll be right back. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay. Okie dokie. Yeah, that would be really cool. I half expected you to be sitting in my room when I came back, Toby. Alrighty. Without further ado, chapter the 3rd. Take a sip of water. I am real fast, like Sonic. Gotta go fast. Alright, got a thing on my screen. Okay, chapter the 3rd. Softly I slipped out of my room. As was her custom, Mrs. Tupper had retired early to her bedchamber, where, even if she were still awake, the dear, deaf old soul could not possibly hear my careful tread as I exited. Since I kept my habit hidden under the bedstead, I felt quite certain Mrs. Tupper had no idea that a second person, so to speak, a rather gaunt, nocturnal sister of Charity, was lodging in her spare room along with that nice young secretary girl, Miss Michelle. I had to feel my way down the dark stairs, for of course in this sorry house, nearly a hovel, there was no gas laid on. Fumbling for the keyhole in the dark, I unlocked the front door with my latchkey, stepped outside, relocked the door behind me, then walked quickly away to lessen the likelihood that any chance midnight watcher should discover where I lived. At random, taking a different route than last night, or the night before, I strode down the shadowy, narrow courts, ill-lit by gas street lamps. Not for the East End were the carriage lamps and flambeaux of the well-to-do, I swear. Okay, I've just gotta say, in this book, they print the words. Hold on. They print all the words so that they, like, run off the page like this. See? And then this one comes off the page. And then a little while later, that word runs off the page. And it's so hard to read because I'm just like, I feel like I'm, like, jerking from, like, word to word. And it's just, anyways. Moving on. Not for the East End were the carriage lamps and flambeaux of the well-to-do, nor the brand-new electric fixtures of the very rich. Here the feeble and wavering lights floated, or rather drowned, in a sea of brown smut. London crouched frigid in its own peculiar choking way. Here midnight's chill was made of chimney soot, coal flames, wood smoke, and dank disease wafting up from the Thames. It was as if one swam in a fog colder than ice, yet never frozen, forever soaking through one's clothing and into one's bones. Such thick and freezing weather had driven indoors all folk who had anywhere to take refuge. Even on the stairways of the lodging-houses one would find vagabonds sleeping. Poor folk who had no other fuel tonight were burning straw stolen from dung-heaps behind stables, and might not live to see morning. When I judged I had left my own lodgings far enough behind, I stepped into the dark gap between houses and lit an oil lantern I had brought with me. Already stiffening with cold, my fingers could barely manipulate the match. One might well wonder why a young lady of gentle breeding would go out under such circumstances. I myself did not fully understand why I felt compelled to wander the night. I am perhaps a bit of a monomaniac, driven always to quest, venture, search, seek, find out, find things, find people. Tonight anyone who might need help to survive. Into my habit, as well as the heavy wool mantle I wore over it, I had sewed many deep pockets, stocked with items I might need, candle stubs and wooden matches, shillings and pence, warm knitted socks and caps and mittens, apples, biscuits, and a flask of brandy. I carried a homemade blanket over one arm. In the other hand I lifted the lantern. Wearing black fur-lined gloves, I held my light high and began to search the back ways and byways, alert for any hint of danger, any sounds of angry altercation or screaming, or footsteps behind me. I listened also for the sound of anyone crying, and before very long I heard it. A low, dull sort of sobbing, reflexive as if the person had given up, weeping only to breathe. Guided by that lament, for my lantern showed me only a few paces of street stone underfoot before all vanished into sooty fog, I found an old woman, crouched in a doorway trying to warm herself in a shawl that covered only her head and shoulders. As I approached, she heard my footsteps. She tried to muffle her weeping with her hands, afraid, but then she sobbed aloud again, this time in relief, recognizing me. Many such folk knew me by now. "Sister," she whispered, "sister of the streets." One thin arm faltered towards me. Mutely, for the sister never spoke or made a sound, I swept down on her, like a big skinny black hen on a chick, I suppose, wrapping her in the blanket I had brought along. A crude thing. I had made my blankets out of hunks of old cloth sewn together, because any coverings of better quality would have been stolen from those who needed them the most. This woman's face, lifted to the lantern light, was perhaps not elderly after all, only harrowed by hardship, her scrawny body stunted by rickets and hunger. Was she a widow or a spinster turned away from a common lodging-house for lack of 8 pence, or had she been driven into the night by a husband's drunken blows? Knowing that I would never know, I slipped thick knitted socks over her bare feet, then brought out of one of my pockets an item I had, I believe, invented, a sizable tin, tiny, stuffed to the brim with wadded paper, into which I had poured paraffin. Lighting a wooden match, I laid it atop this sort of portable fire and set it in the doorway beside her where it started to burn, flaring like an overlarge candle, putting off a good deal of heat. It would last only an hour or so, but long enough for her to warm herself. And hidden enough, I hoped, so that it would not attract any unwelcome company to her. I gave her an apple, some biscuits and meat pie that had come from a baker, not a street vendor, and therefore might be made of good wholesome meat, not intermixed with dog or cat. "Thank you so much, sister." The woman could not seem to stop weeping, but she would, I thought, after I went away. Quickly I slipped her a few shillings, money enough to buy her food and lodging for several days, but not so much she was likely to be killed for it. Then, standing back, I turned away, hoping she understood there was nothing more I could do for her. "Sister of the streets, God bless you," she called after me. Her gratitude made me feel like a fraud, a farce, unworthy, for there were many, too many like her, that I could never possibly find them all. Striding along my way, I myself shivered with cold and with fear, listening. Tipsy singing and drunken yells floated faintly to my ears from the next street. A public house, still open? I wondered how this was allowed. Surely the authorities. My attention diverted, too late I sensed, to presence behind me. Some small sound, perhaps the chuff of stone leather against the frozen mud and the crushed stone of the street, perhaps the hiss of an evil breath, but even as I opened my startled mouth to gasp, even as I leapt to turn, something seized seized me around the neck. Something unseen, behind me, fearsomely strong, gripping tight, tighter. Not a human grasp, something narrow, doomed, serpentine, constricting, biting into my throat. I could not think, and never even reached for my dagger. I only reacted, dropping my lantern as both my hands flew up to claw at the thing, whatever it was, tormenting my neck. But already I felt my breathing cut off, my body thrashing in pain, my mouth stretching in a voiceless scream, my vision dimming to darkness, and I knew I was going to die. It seems to me that I next grew aware of a light in the darkness, but not a kindly light. This was orange, dancing, diabolical. Blinking my way out of blackness, I felt the cold, harsh street beneath me, and saw that I lay near a fire. A pool of oil, leaking from my broken lantern, burned merrily. In that gleeful glow, 3 or 4 men peered down at me, very blurred, that memory. Blurred by night and fog, by my confusion and pain, by my veil, as blurred as their drunken voices. Is she dead? What sort of cad would garrot the sister? Maybe one of them foreign anarchists who don't like religion. Didn't any of you see him? Is she breathing? Bending over me, one of them lifted my veil. I think he looked at my face for a moment before I struck his hands away, before my shock at such impropriety roused me from my swoon. No, one can hardly say I had tumbled down in a faint, not in any delicate lady sense of the word. Surely if one is strangled half dead, one cannot be accused of fainting. In any event, blinking my way out of unconsciousness took a moment or two, which I remember imperfectly. I believe I struck out at the man who was lifting my veil, yanking it back down over my face again as I rolled away from the fire and wavered to my feet. "'Ere, missus, what's your hurry? Steady on, old 'orse. Watch it, sister, you'll fall." Hands reached towards me, but rejecting their offers of help, for they were staggering drunk, whereas I was merely staggering, I fled. I retreated, as the military would say, in bad order, without ever having drawn a weapon, in a panic of dry sobbing. Indeed, I hardly know how I blundered my way back into my lodging, but somehow, eventually, I reached my room, where trembling I lit every oil lamp, every candle, and stirred up the hearth fire, wastefully throwing on wood and coal until I roused a blaze of warmth and light in the night. I threw myself into my armchair and sat trying to stop panting, for each breath hurt my throat. Closing my mouth, I swallowed again and again, trying to swallow my humiliation as well as my pain. Despite the fire, I still felt cold with more than just night's frost, chilled to the marrow of my soul. I needed to get into bed. Staggering up, I began to unbutton my high collar. My trembling fingers felt something hanging around my neck. Some alien presence, long and smooth, supple, as if it was a snake, clung there. Despite the pain to my injured throat, I cried out as I snatched and clawed at the thing, fumbling it off of me and flinging it to the floor. There on my hearth rug it lay, the garrote. I had heard that they were made of wire, but this one was fashioned instead of some sort of smooth white cord knotted to a stick of wood. Caught in that knot, I saw a cluster of brown hair, my own, wrenched from my head as the garroter had twisted the device tighter and tighter around my neck. Swaying where I stood, I had to close my eyes for a moment, realizing that only my high collar, stiffened with whalebone, had kept me alive. London's constables wore high-collared tunics for the same reason. How astonishing and fearsome to think that such a simple device could terrorize an entire metropolis, even the police. Fearsome also and shameful to realize that not any courage or wit of my own had saved me. Forgetting my weapon like a bumbling fool, I had kicked and clawed no better than any other preyed-upon female. Collar or no collar, I might be dead had those drunkards not happened along. Yes, I decided, indeed, they must have interrupted the garroter. Why else would anyone have left his lovingly fashioned apparatus around my neck? Trembling badly, I forced myself to open my eyes again, studying that loathsome device. Lovingly fashioned indeed. The stick of polished malacca wood might have been taken from a gentleman's cane, hardly the sort of implement one would expect of a street thug, and the cord, a stay lacing. That is to say, the lacing from a lady's corset. Sudden sickness lurched through me, and with it a blaze of anger. Snatching up the foul-minded, insolent thing, I flung it into the fire. That's the end of chapter 3. Ta-da! Thanks, guys. Just catching up on your chats. Making sure I didn't miss anything directed at me. So I think I'm going to read 2 more chapters. Get through chapter 5. Yeah, I think that's what we'll do. So maybe, depending on how long these chapters are, let's look and see. Yeah, I think we'll be okay. So I think probably maybe another 30 minutes or so, and then I'm probably going to call it a night, just because, I don't want to keep you all up all night long. But yeah. Alrighty. Thanks for joining me, though. I appreciate you guys being here and just supporting, and now that I know I can play music in my stream, it's kind of cool. No, I'm not going till 6 a.m. Terror. Thanks for the thought. So. Alrighty. 8 a.m. No. You guys wouldn't even stay up and watch it, so why would I do that? That would just be the biggest waste of time for both of us. Alrighty. Oh! Please have her save me some, Tori. I really want those pears, because they're really yummy. Aw, thanks, Terror. You'd probably fall asleep partway in it. But. Oh my gosh, you guys stop. You're trying to guilt me into this. Just stop. I'm not staying up all night long reading this book. As much as I would like that, I would probably not like that. So, you guys are nuts. Just stop. Stop! Okay. Chapter the 4th. For 2 days I stayed in bed, conveying to Mrs. Tupper by signs, as I could barely speak, that I had a sore throat, a common enough ailment at that time of year, and I'm sure she had thought nothing more of it. The high ruffled collar of my nightgown hid my bruised neck. It could not, however, comfort my bruised and ruffled feelings. While accustomed to physical pain, often enough as a child I had fallen from a bicycle, a horse, a tree, I found myself not all accustomed to being hurt by another human being in such an offhanded way. It was not only my sore throat that had prevented me from eating the soups and jellies Mrs. Tupper offered me. It was the malice of what had happened that made me sick. Malice and impropriety. No, far more than impropriety. Some evil I could not yet name. Something about the stay-lacing. What sort of man would attack a woman with a weapon derived from a cane, the sort of stick used to thrash school-children, and a corset? Intimate feminine apparel by which upper-class females were compressed to fit into their ridiculous dresses, making them ornamental to society, prone to fainting spells, and susceptible to internal injuries and death. It was largely in order to escape straight-lacing that I had given my brothers Mycroft and Sherlock the slip. I had fled so that no so-called boarding school could thrash me or try to cut me in half at the waist, and now someone had put that thing around my neck? For what purpose? To rob me of what? And why was such a strangely disturbing weapon? Was it indeed a man who had attacked me, or some mad woman? These were answers for which I lacked answers. These were questions for which I lacked answers. By the 3rd day I could talk a little, and I returned to Dr. Ragiston's office, where I made myself comfortable, in body if not in mind, reading the stack of newspapers that had accumulated during my absence. I found my message to Mum in the newspapers, for I had sent copies to Fleet Street by post, but I found no message from Mum to me. Of course it was too early to expect a reply. Still I could not help looking. This would not do. Feeling sorry for myself like a child, wanting Mummy. What would Mother have told me if she were here? Utterly predictable. You will do very well on your own, Enola. A statement I had always accepted as rather a compliment. But on this particular day, with the pain in my throat, exacerbated by a lump that had arisen therein, I suddenly, achingly realized that I wanted something, or someone. I wanted no longer to be alone. Enola, alone, with no one to walk by my side, with no one to confide in, with no one to comfort me. Yet I knew quite well that any companionship simply could not be, not for another 7 years, for until I became legally adult, every person who knew me posed a threat to me of discovery. Jotty, a danger if he learned too much. Mrs. Tupper, likewise. The grocers and bakers who supplied the food I gave to the poor, the washerwoman who did my oddly assorted laundry, the whitesmith who had made my daggers for me, each a risk. I had thought of keeping a pet, but even a dog could ruin me just by recognizing me at the wrong time. Old Reginald, the collie from Ferndale, if he were somehow transported to London and encountered me, would hurl himself at me with ecstatic canine cries, no matter how I might be disguised. And if Lane the butler were with him, and Mrs. Lane, if they found me, she would burst into happy tears, for she had been like a mother to me, more so than— Stop, Enola Holmes, you stop sniveling this instant. I needed to get up, get moving, accomplish something. Very well. There was nothing I could do concerning Mum or concerning Sherlock's distress until I had heard from Mum, and although I fervidly wished for justice, or indeed revenge, at this point there was nothing I could do about the unknown garroter who had distressed me. But there was surely something I could do concerning my life's calling, being a Praetorian. Something I could do about Sir Eustace Alastair's missing daughter. I had promised myself that for his first case Dr. Ragiston would find her. I needed to know the particulars. After some thought I rose and made my way back through various passageways to the kitchen, where the cook and the housekeeper were having their mid-morning cup of tea. Both looked startled to see me enter that room, and apprehensive because normally I would have simply rung for service, so what was wrong? Mrs. Bailey, I croaked to the cook, I do not feel quite well. My throat is most dreadfully sore. Do you suppose— Of course, Mrs. Bailey, relieved, answering my request before I could frame it. Illness, you see, explained my presence in the kitchen, which, due to hearth stove and water heater, was by far the warmest place in the house. Tea? She jumped up to put the kettle on. The very thing. Thank you kindly. Do sit down, Miss Michelle, invited the other one, Miss Fitzsimmons, the housekeeper, offering me the chair closest to the fire. At the table with the two of them I sipped, briefly, answering their inquiries about my health, after which they resumed their conversation. Mrs. Bailey had been to a music hall the night before to see a mesmerist, or a magnetizer. One of them pursy, swarthy, shaggy-browed Frenchman with wolf eyes. He had been assisted by a wench in one of them French-clinging gowns, who lay on an examining couch while he had her stare at the usual shiny object, in this case a candle flame, and flicked his hands at her face as if sprinkling her with this vital principle, then made the customary magnetic passes over her entire person. Scandalous. Close to her his hands come, but he didn't touch her. She lay with her eyes open like a corpse, and he told her to eat soap, and she chewed it down like it was toffee. He told her she were a pony, and she whinnied. He told her she were a bridge, and picked her up and put her down across two chairs, and there she lay stiff as a stone. He fired a pistol near her ear. Sitting and listening, I concealed my impatience with difficulty, for it was all jugglery and rot, of course. Mesmerism has been discredited years ago, along with dead bodies electrically galvanized into the appearance of life, incorporeal table-turning, spiritualist, slate-writing, and all sorts of nonsense, masquerading as science and progress. Invited us to come up and test the trance. One gent pinched her, and his wife passed smelling salts under her nose, and me, I run up to her, and she never so much as twitched. Then after we was done, the mesmerist made more of them magnetic passes with his hands, and up she jumps all smiling, and we give 'em both a real big clap of our hands, and they went out, and the next thing there was a phrenologist. Oh, no more. More pseudoscientific dust of the past. I interrupted. Is it true, I asked, that the Queen once shaved her head for a phrenological reading? Phrenological. I don't know what that means, but it sounds like pheromones to me. Phrenological reading. They could scarcely believe it. No wonder, as I had just made it up thereby, I am sure spawning a rumor, but anything was possible. Lady this and lady that held seances, Duke so-and-so somnambulated, several young honorable lords had experimented with laughing gas, etc. I had succeeded in changing the subject to the fascinating foibles of the upper classes, about which, like most domestics, these two knew everything. Scandal might be hushed up in the newspapers, but no event in any London household was secret so long as there were servants to whisper with other people's maids and footmen. Accepting a second cup of tea, I waited for my opportunity. It came when a member of the peerage was mentioned. Coughing for attention and sympathy, I asked, would he be acquainted with Sir Eustace Alastair? I doubt it, declared Mrs. Fitzsimmons. Sir Eustace is just a baronet, don't you know, said the cook. And disgraced to boot, said the housekeeper with a hushed voice and zestful eyes. I reacted with satisfactory shock and interest. Disgraced? How so? By his daughter, Lady Cecily. Shameful affair. Horrendous for her parents, said the cook. One hears Lady Alastair is quite prostrated, she is. The housekeeper replied, the cook interjected, and during the next several minutes between the two of them, the story took form, in my mind at least, like a structure emerging from the fog. The Honourable Lady Cecily Alastair, Sir Eustace's second oldest, just 16 years of age and not yet presented at court, had gone missing Tuesday of last week, on which morning a ladder had been found at her bedroom window. Upon being questioned by police authorities, girlfriends of Lady Cicely admitted to her having been approached last summer while in their company. Hardly never no chaperones any more, and them girls horseback riding, bicycle riding, shopping on their own. What's the world coming to? By a young gent, that is to say, a man of dandified attire but doubtful pedigree. Further inquiry and search of Lady Cicely's desk revealed that she and the young man had been corresponding quite without proper introduction or the knowledge of her parents. It had taken the police, who only had first name to work with, 4 days to locate this impertinent male who had turned out to be a mere shopkeeper's son with no proper sense of his place, very likely with aspirations far above his station in life. By then, of course, it was far too late. Horrible if she married him, and even worse if she didn't. But as it turned out, she had not been found with him. The young man had protested in the strongest terms his innocence in any wrongdoing. Rubbish. Men only wants one thing. He had been watched and followed since, but no sign of Lady Cicely had been discovered. More tea, Miss Michelle? I smiled and shook my head. No, Mrs. Bailey, thank you very much. I believe I must go attend to business now. Returning to the front of the establishment, I withdrew from my own outer office into Dr. Ragiston's, instructing Jotty that I was on no account to be disturbed. I often napped in Dr. Ragiston's office during the days, after I had been out all night just as the sister. Judging by Jotty's impertinent grin, which I ignored, he thought I intended to spend a few hours swaddled in afghans on Dr. Ragiston's comfortable chintz sofa. This was what I wished him and the other servants to think. Aside from the aforementioned sofa facing the hearth, Dr. Ragiston's inner sanctum featured a rather grandiose desk I had provided for that fictitious personage, leather armchairs for his clients, and the resplendent Turkish carpet upon which these furnishings stood. Between heavily draped windows stood a tall bookshelf, and other bookshelves lined the 3 remaining walls entirely, except, of course, the gas sconces upon the long mirrors to reflect the light, separated them. Such plenitude of bookshelves had been left behind by the previous occupant, a so-called spiritualist medium. This had been a seance room. After locking its door from the inside, closing the thick serge drapes for privacy, and turning up the gas jet chandelier to illuminate the resulting gloom, I walked to the first bookshelf on the inner wall. There I reached behind a stout volume of Pope's essays, released a silent latch, then pulled off the left edge of the bookshelf towards me. With only fingertip pressure and utterly without sound, for the hinges were perfectly hung and lavishly oiled, the entire shelf swung open like a door to reveal a small room behind it. Here I felt sure the medium's accomplices had hidden. I, however, used the closet-sized space to hide items of another sort, which I now needed, in order to be received at the baronet's residence. I could not go as Ivy Michelle. I needed to effect a transformation. I lit a candle. Then, shivering with cold, for there was no fire laid on in this room, I pulled off Ivy Michelle's cheap flounced poplin dress, along with the bulbous brooch she always wore, with a purpose. Welded to my dagger hilt, this brooch looked like an ornament pinned to my dress front, but actually allowed my weapon's handle to protrude between my buttons. Grasping the brooch, I drew the dagger from my corset with a flourish, admiring its shining, thin, razor-edged blade, and a moment before laying it aside. I laid aside also Ivy Michelle's false hair, ear-bobs, etc., until I stood in my underpinnings, the most essential of which, ironically, was my corset. Yes, despite my opinion of corsets, I wore one always, but as my protective friend, never tightened to become my tormentor. For me, a corset provided not constraint, but freedom it gave by furnishing defense, disguise, and supplies. Aside from sheathing my dagger, the corset supported my bust enhancer, where I concealed many useful items, including a small fortune in the Bank of England notes, by which, along with hip regulators, I maintained a figure quite different than that of the unembellished Enola Holmes. Undressed then, except for padding, protection, and petticoats, I bent to a basin and washed away my rouge, grimacing, for the water I kept in the closet was all but freezing, then looked at a mirror. My own long, plain, sallow face, framed by my own long, plain, brownish hair, looked back at me. The hair was a problem. In order to pass as a woman, you see, I had to wear it up. Girls wore their frocks short and their hair long, but women had to wear their dresses long and their hair up. While almost every other inch of gentlewoman must be covered during the daytime, her ears, it seemed, must always be bared. Today I needed to pass as a gentlewoman. Such ladies, however, had maids to arrange their hair for them, and I had none. I will spare the gentle reader the details of the struggle. Suffice it to say that nearly an hour later, a gentlewoman with her hair up and mostly hidden beneath a formidable hat emerged from behind a bookshelf. I wore a gray day dress, custom-made of its finest worsted, yet discreet, almost dowdy in its styling. And yes, with the brooch centered upon its bosom, this time a tasteful oval made of mother-of-pearl. I possessed, you see, more than one dagger. I put on quite a lovely fur coat with a dainty little muff to match before closing and concealing my dressing room, then approached a different bookcase, the one that stood by the outer wall. I reached behind another stout tome, Pilgrim's Progress, manipulated another hidden latch, and slipped out of Dr. Ragaston's office by the secret door. That's the end of chapter 4. Thank you for saving me a pear. Who doesn't like Dr. Pepper? Words. Why are you saying words? I don't understand. I don't understand. Words are hard. This is very true. We can share a pair, Rudy. We can share. We can share. Totally cool. Or you can have it, and I'll just have the next one. Either way. I'm really sorry about this light right here. I feel like it's really obnoxious, but my room is really small and really dark, so I kind of feel like I just gotta make do. Did you count all of them? 400 pairs? Did you count all of them? I don't think you did. I think this is false advertising. Riddy, you don't have to yell at me. I will not take the pear because I don't believe in succumbing to aggression. Alrighty. Chapter the 4th. No, just finished chapter 4. Chapter the 5th. My crafty predecessor had placed this exit well. I emerged behind a bushy evergreen that grew in the narrow space between houses. From there I was able to make my way to the street, satisfied that no one could possibly have seen me leave, not even that sharp-eyed Mrs. Fitzsimmons, who had probably verbally dissected me with Mrs. Bailey the moment my back was turned. Poor dear, with more than enough nose and chin, but barely anything else. A woman can tell. If any man ever marries her, he'll find himself sorely deceived. Dealing with my miserable hair, the color of bog mud, and as limp as the rotting vegetation thereof, had put me in bad humor. Once safely in a four-wheeler cab, I pulled paper and pencil from one of my pockets and drew a quick, rather rude sketch of Mrs. Fitzsimmons and Mrs. Bailey with their old-fashioned white ruffled house caps bent together in gossip, their shrewd baggy eyes and their lipless gabbing mouths rather like a pair of turtles, actually. Then, having got temper out of the way, I more calmly sketched a picture of a young gentlewoman in a fur cloak and muff and brimmed velvet hat trimmed with grebe feathers. Beneath this elegant headgear she peered nearsightedly, for no lady, however faulty her vision, will wear glasses. So gently reared as to be nearly helpless, she walked with her head bent and her shoulders drawn in, very plain despite her fine clothing. Dr. Ragaston's shy child bride, Mrs. Ragaston. By drawing this, I reminded myself who I was being today. When the urge to sketch seized me, I could have drawn Ivy Michelle if I wanted to, or Mum, or Sherlock, or Mycroft, or just about anyone I knew except Enola Holmes. My true self I could not quite capture on paper. Odd. The cab took me to a fashionable street. As it pulled to a halt, I stowed my papers deep in a pocket. On 2 occasions, Sherlock Holmes had seen my drawings, and I must be careful never to give myself away by leaving any behind. When I returned to my lodgings, I would burn the sketches. Alighting at the corner with both silk-gloved hands tucked into my muff, I waited until the cab had driven away. You see why only dowagers wore bustles anymore. Mercy be thanked. Their clumsy bulk was going out of fashion. Still, a gentlewoman must trail a train. The hem of my long cloak and back of my even longer skirt dragged upon the icy cobbles, indicating the social class of one who rode in carriages. So I stood where I was until the cab had departed. Dr. Ragaston, I knew, really ought to keep his own little brougham and pair, but there were limits, however generous, to the funds Mum had provided me. Fortunately, I seldom needed to be Mrs. Ragaston. Very fortunately, as I wore my own unadulterated face for this purpose, Ivy Michelle could hide behind rouge, fair-hued hair additions, and cheap baubles, but no lady could do so. As I strode on the corner, 2 top-hatted gentlemen strode past me with glares of disapproval. My wife stays home where she belongs, none of this peripatetic nonsense. These words. Grumbled one to his companion. That young lady will bring trouble upon herself, wandering about alone, the other agreed, and 'twill be her own fault. I ignored them, and tried not to let their comments darken the day, which was quite gloomy enough already. Although the clocks had just struck 1 in the afternoon, a lamplighter climbed his ladder, for with the London sky thick with smoke, fog, and soot, it might as well have been evening. All over the rooftops of the city, chimneys stood like dark candles spewing smut. Workmen and cleaning women walked past me, coughing. Someone would die of the Wow. Here, I'll type it. You can guess what this word is. A ragged little girl with a broom approached me. At my nod, the child hurried to sweep the crossing for me, banishing from my path the muck of soot, stone, dust, mud, and horse droppings that always coated the street. Following the child to the other side, I tipped her generously, a penny, not just a farthing. Then, myself willy-nilly sweeping the pavement with my train, I progressed toward my destination, the residence of Sir Eustace Alastair. Upon the massive front door I found a large brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head. Yeah, but I don't know how to pronounce it. Remembering to strike timidly as befit Mrs. Ragaston, I employed it. Presently the door was opened by a maid, all shining in afternoon black, behind whom stood an equally resplendent butler. Her ladyship is not receiving visitors, the butler told me, his manner as cold as the winter day. Her ladyship is not feeling well. If you would just take up this card in my sympathies, I said in the voice of an exceedingly well-bred mouse. Balefully he fetched his silver tray, upon which I laid the card of Dr. Leslie T. Ragaston, scientific Purgatorian, on which I had pinned Mrs. I sent the carriage away. I murmured, one must be discreet, this to explain the absence of a footman or any other accompanying servant. Stepping inside, for they could hardly leave such a well-dressed lady freezing upon the doorstep, I added, I will just warm myself up by the fire. The maid was good enough to take my cloak and muff, not my hat. A lady's hat and hair, once arranged, remained inseparable. Hatted and gloved indoors, I could not have looked more absurdly upper class. Still loitering in the rather grand parlor, I had no idea whether Lady Theodora, that was the wife's name, Theodora, I had looked up, Alastair, Sir Eustace Baronet, in Dr. Ragaston's copy of Boyle's to find the address. As I say, I did not know whether the lady would condescend to see me. She might find my unexpected arrival a straw worth grasping at. On the other hand, depending on whether pride outweighed desperation, she might consider such presumption to be the last straw. Trying to imagine the dialogue taking place upstairs, I could only hope that the lady understood what Purgatorian meant, and that the butler had been sufficiently impressed by my apparel and demeanor. Ahem. The butler reappeared at the parlor door, and while he looked as disapproving as ever, he told me, Lady Theodora is not dressed to receive you in the morning room, but she wonders whether you would care to step into her boudoir for a few moments. Ah, just as I'd hoped, although I must now proceed with the greatest delicacy. Following the butler upstairs, I heard youthful voices issuing from a nursery on the floor above, where a nanny or perhaps a governess attempted to civilize the Alastair children. The Honourable Lady Cecily, according to Boyles, had no less than 7 brothers and sisters. Such being the case, it is amazing how youthful in appearance Lady Theodora turned out to be, or perhaps such was the effect of her grief plus her perfectly lovely lacy tea-frock. A recent fad instigated by the artwork of Kate Greenaway, tea-frocks allowed one to go without a corset when receiving, female only, visitors in one's personal rooms. In the high-waisted, comfortable, very pretty garment, Lady Theodora appeared charming and almost childlike, where I would have looked like a proper stork in one. She did not immediately turn to me as I stepped in the door. With maids in fluttering attendance, fussing with her long curls of auburn hair, she remained upon a dainty chair facing her dressing-table, powdering her tear-stained face so that I saw her first in the mirror. Our eyes met in a glass darkly, as it were. Remembering to be bashful, I glanced away. I am sure she took a good long look at me while I stood gazing up and around like a tourist in a European cathedral. Actually, the room was rather similar to Mum's at home, light and airy with Japanese screens and furniture carved in the delicate Oriental fashion. Not so grand, but I must seem odd. Timid, I remind myself mentally. Married young, naive, and terribly plain. No threat to anyone. That will do. Turning, Lady Theodora shrugged off a filmy combing jacket and shooed the servants away with her hands. Mrs. Ragiston, please sit down. I perched on the edge of a settee. My, apologies for intruding upon you in this, that is to say, unseemly matter, quite without proper introduction, Lady Alistair, and it's such a difficult... I allowed my barely audible murmurings to trail away in a pretense of confusion, because I, a stranger, was not supposed to know that this was a difficult time for her, although she knew perfectly well that I did know. Why else would I be there? She spared me further pretense. Your husband sent you, Mrs. Ragiston? I lifted my lowered eyes to Lady Theodora's pretty face. No, beautiful. This was a beautiful woman. Somewhat square of a jaw and full of mouth, but with brilliant eyes. Her expression remarkably cultured and sensitive. A society lady who was not usually so direct, I imagined, much more the type to play the game of social disassembling to its fullest, dealing in hints and imitations and coyness. Only extremity could drive her to be so blunt. Yes, I faltered. Dr. Ragiston felt that it would be indelicate for him to venture here himself, you know. Once more the stumbling halt to allow her the choice whether to speak of that which the whole world knew, but was not supposed to know. Lady Theodora stiffened for only a moment before she nodded. I have often noticed how a proud and beautiful woman will find a friend in one who is plain, quiet, and humble. Yes, she said in a low voice. My daughter, Lady Cecily, seems to have... That is, or rather, we, her parents, don't know where she is. I am correct to understanding that your husband finds persons who have gone missing. Yes, quite so. Is he offering his services? If you wish, but with no expectation of reward, my lady. Indeed, she did not believe this, She thought it more than likely that Dr. Ragiston was opportunistic and a sham, but at the same time, she said it. I am desperate, Mrs. Ragiston. Watching my face, she spoke with deliberate control, but I could see her trembling. There has been no news of my daughter. None. For a week, and the authorities seem utterly ineffectual. Surely your husband can do no worse. No doubt I am being a fool, for I am under orders to summon no one to my own, but I can hardly be blamed if you have come to me. I cannot help feeling that a providential God may have sent you here, however self-serving. Not you personally, I mean, but your husband. No offense intended. None taken, I assure you, Lady Theodora. I allowed my shy, apologetic gaze to drift towards her. Most preposterous my being here, but husbands will have their way. I could not have struck a stronger empathetic chord in her. Oh, Mrs. Ragiston, she actually leaned forward to clasp my gloved hands. How true! The men ruin everything, yet they are so wrong. In my heart I know that Cecily would not go anywhere they say she has, and the fact that they have not found her shows me to be correct, yet they persist in believing... How awful! Even my husband... I nodded, thinking ahead to guide the conversation without, I hoped, her noticing. Is your husband very much older than you are, Lady Theodora? Only a few years, but is Dr. Ragiston greatly your senior? Yes, I am his third wife. Why, I am not much older than... She said it for me. Whispered it, actually. Than my daughter, Lady Cecily. Indeed. Quite. Therefore, I was thinking... Yes? Already we had become co-conspirators. Our knees almost touched. She sat so close to me, clinging to my hands. I wonder if, as a girl of Lady Cecily's age, I might notice something that the police detectives have overlooked. Oh, how I wish you would, Mrs. Ragiston. I have been longing to do something, but what, and how? I almost forgot to play my role, but remembered in time to hesitate, biting my lip before I said, Well, one must start somewhere. If it is at all possible, Lady Theodora, might I examine Lady Cecily's rooms? That's the end of chapter 5. Look at all the emotes, man. Qatar. Alrighty. That's chapter 5. Well, folks, I think I think that's probably a good place to start. I guess we could keep going, but I feel like it's a good stopping place right here. So I think we're just gonna do the intro in the first 5 chapters, and then next time we'll do chapter like 6 through 10, and then we'll do. I kind of like doing these books in thirds. So, anyways, thank you guys so much for coming and listening and just hanging out. I appreciate it so much. I really enjoy it. And it's a good excuse to get me to read through some books that, because I don't read for pleasure a whole lot these days. So, it's a good opportunity for me. Oh no, I don't want to wait 9 months to stream again. I think I'm going to be a little more motivated now that I've like caught up on like saving my streams and stuff. So anyways, I'm going to put my old stuff on YouTube if anybody needs to catch up on old stuff. And I like all those hats. I like the green one that you posted earlier. So I'm going to leave you guys with some Sherlock Holmes music now that I know how to do that. And I will catch you guys. Maybe I'm hoping to maybe try and stream. I don't know. Tomorrow's Father's Day, so I don't know what we've got planned with my father. But maybe Monday evening, we'll do some more. If not Monday, yeah. So maybe Monday or maybe sometime this weekend. We'll see. But I will catch you guys later. Thanks for being here, and I will see you next time. Have a good night. Love you guys. Take care.